Hello, and welcome to Kenzie's Fashion Corner. This is a little extra from the 90s discussion that Anthony and I just had. So, he kindly asked me if there was anything about 90s fashion that I wanted to discuss, and of course, I said yes. Just a little bit of background. In addition to, like you said, being a 90s baby, I have always enjoyed fashion, and he and I both studied history, so I'm very interested in seeing how different trends and aesthetics emerged in different times and why they took hold. So, there are a couple things that I wanted to discuss, a couple of moments that I thought I should touch on. And I guess as I'm looking over my notes, I divided them up into some different vibes. So, to start out with, I will talk about a little bit about grunge. And that aesthetic came out of the Northwest, of course, where the grunge music scene was really taking hold and was characterized by you can't talk about grunge without mentioning flannel. Lots of oversized garments in kind of earthy colors, combat boots, and I believe, according to research that I've done, a lot of that was inspired by a very laid back attitude in terms of not caring too much. You didn't want to look like you were caring too much about what you wore, but it still had a really cool vibe to it. And a lot of young people, and especially people in the music scene at that time, were thrifting a lot, which is really common across all groups of people today, and it's always been around, but it really was that kind of do-it-yourself sort of aesthetic. So of course you would see that a lot in, gosh, I have to mention Nirvana. Kurt Cobain definitely was a very iconic person in that regard, and his wife, Courtney Love, and I'll mention them again in a second. But you can definitely see that for women, baby doll dresses with ditzy floral print on it, black tights or knee highs, flannel over that, ripped jean, anything, a ripped jean, jean jacket, and Doc Martens, which I believe Doc Martens, which I'm a big fan of, and I mentioned earlier, those were developed, I think, after World War II and was mainly worn by people who worked a lot on their feet, so postal workers, for instance. And then they really had, I don't know exactly what inspired it, but definitely had a resurgence in the 90s. And I wanted to mention this, kind of bringing it into runway fashion. So I think most people are familiar with who Marc Jacobs is today, or you've at least heard his name before. And before he had his own label, he was a designer for someone called Perry Ellis. And in the spring 1993 Ready to Wear collection, that was kind of a moment that people look back on as being the moment that grunge became more mainstream. Before, it felt more organic, and again, like that's just how people naturally dressed. There wasn't any artifice to it. People weren't trying too hard. But what he did was, I looked at a piece that writer Lynn Yeager wrote for Vogue. And she said, she's a writer for them, and she said that what really distinguished that collection from some earlier ones was one of the first times that high fashion was looking at streetwear and drawing inspiration from streetwear. So what he did is Marc Jacobs took a lot of those pieces that I mentioned before, of course, the flannel, beanies, layered outfits, the ditzy floral dresses, that sort of thing, but used more hard to find textiles for it, so like silk, just kind of an elevated version, I guess, of what people were really wearing. And as I said, I mentioned Kurt Cobain and Courtney Love earlier. Courtney Love is definitely very iconic and emblematic of grunge and that look in general. But apparently, Marc Jacobs sent some clothes from that collection to them, and they burned them. Yeah. So I forget which of them said it, but they said it wouldn't really be genuine punk to wear something so high fashion and so, I don't know, luxe, I guess. So I thought that was really interesting. And if you look at it today, I think they did a re-release of some of the garments in, I think, around 2015, but they really hold up. I really love them. And I can definitely see the argument that, you know, it's being appropriated and made gosh, I can't think of the word, but more luxurious and elite, I guess kind of for the elites, when really the whole heart of it is just being true to yourself, going to the thrift store, just buying something, and practical for Northwestern weather where it's always raining, and so closely tied to the music, which also has that very natural, unpolished kind of feel to it. So I can definitely see where people would criticize the fact that it made its way to the runway.
Isn't that like Champion clothing? Like how Champion used to be the brand that you got at Walmart for really cheap, and now they're like hoity-toity and everything.
Exactly. And I think that's what's so interesting about fashion as a kind of, I don't know, conversation of exactly seeing. I mean, you could even say that about like dad jeans and New Balances, where before that was just something that a suburban dad wore while he was grilling your burgers or something, and now Bella Hadid walks down the street wearing it and you're like, oh my god, that looks so cool. So it's really interesting how the connotations that certain pieces or whole looks together have, how they take on a different significance depending on who's wearing them and the context that they're in.
Right.
So that's what I thought was really cool about grunge. And then also I haven't watched this show. It's a cult favorite. Have you heard of My So-Called Life?
I've heard of it.
Yes. So Jared Leto was on that show back in, I think it was like 93 or 94, but anything that I have seen from that show, you can definitely see how grunge came in. And bringing it back to when we talked about Are You Afraid of the Dark, part of the reason I love that show so much is that you can definitely see those kids wearing just that, a lot of flannel, a lot of DIY denim, combat boots, and I love the practicality of it, but then I also love the feminine element of like I said, the florals that were incorporated too. So yeah, that's always fun. And then I also wanted to talk about some of the more preppy, polished side of fashion in the 90s with, I have to mention Clueless, that came out in 1995, and I think that everyone is pretty familiar with Cher's iconic yellow plaid outfit. She wore a lot of those matching sets with the baby doll socks and everything. And apparently Alicia, I think that's how you say her name, she herself wasn't really into fashion, and she was really tired of having to go through all the fittings. I think Cher wears maybe 60 outfits in the movie, and she's a fashion police. She's a Beverly Hills girl who loves clothing and wears it well, and Alicia was just like, oh gosh, I'm so tired of getting this done. But I think that a lot of Cher's looks still resonate with people today, because even though, again, especially the baby doll, the knee-high socks and the little backpacks and stuff do look very 90s and of its time, a lot of the stuff that she wears is really classic and could just be tweaked a little bit to look even more modern today. But I learned this today when researching for this quick little segment. Apparently that's a Dolce & Gabbana outfit that she wore, the yellow set, and the costume designer is named Mona May. And she also was the costume designer for Never Been Kissed. I love that movie. Kind of weird and problematic today.
What isn't?
Right, exactly. And also Romy and Michelle's high school reunion. She did that too. So I think she definitely has a knack for a really fun, bright, but chic, kind of playful looks. So I wanted to mention that. And then I don't know if she happened to wear any, if Cher wore any in the movie, but 90s Chanel is just perfection to me. And of course, that's when you had a lot of the supermodels who really were household names at that time, and everybody knew who they were. But I really love, again, Chanel, Coco Chanel has, there's some murky morality there with her ties with maybe some Nazis during
Jesus.
World War II. Yeah, so that's a story for another time.
My God.
I just wanted to mention that.
Okay.
What's interesting is that before, Chanel was really associated with being an older woman's kind of brand, like something your grandma would wear, just very practical, tweed and matching sets and pearls and that kind of thing. But when Karl Lagerfeld, who himself has said some questionable things, when he took over, I think in the 80s, he really rebranded it pretty successfully toward younger people. And I think it was between like 91 and 94, those ready-to-wear collections are beautiful. And I just think of the model Claudia Schiffer wearing those matching sets with a tweed, a cropped tweed jacket, and a tweed mini skirt, and pearls, and then there were these really beautiful golden chain belts that they wore with the interlocking C's, the Chanel logo. That just really beautiful. It was very classic, but again had kind of like in Clueless, that playful mini skirt sort of feel. So when I think of 90s fashion, I think of that. And then I also just thought of, in mentioning supermodels, you have Kate Moss, who is on the scene, and that it's interesting how you have that really polished, girly, Clueless, Chanel kind of vibe, but then you also had the grunge Kate Moss heroin chic kind of thing at play. And Kate Moss was so different from other models of that time, because not only was she shorter, I think she's taller than me, but she was shorter for being a model. But there was definitely the question, the cultural, social question of, oh gosh, is she promoting a malnourished look? Is she glamorizing that sort of thing?
Right.
To which I don't really know the answer. I don't think that that's a look to emulate, because I don't think that's natural for most people. I don't even know if that was natural for her. But yeah, even though it was in the same decade, you have these different looks, and you could kind of tap into, based on what I know, I was dressing in children's clothes then, yeah. But I think you could tap into different ones. And I definitely, as I'm talking, I know I need to brush up more on guys' fashion from that time.
Well, the reason I asked you to do this segment was because I have 3 notes for 90s fashion.
Please.
I have tie-dye.
Yes.
I have double denim.
Yes.
And I have baggy.
Okay, that really sums it up. And there's a great scene in Clueless where Cher is talking about how the guys at her school dress, and that actually, those three items sum it up. It's like a quick little montage of these guys with really baggy pants that are basically falling off of them, lots of denim, and I'm pretty sure there's some tie-dye thrown in there. So yeah, that does it.
But also for guys' fashion, the bowl cut.
Yes.
Is what it makes me think of.
Okay, how many kids in your kindergarten and first grade classes had a bowl cut?
I'm pretty sure we all did, and yeah. I did as well.
Yeah, I had girlfriends with a bowl cut.
But what do they call it where like they part it in the middle?
Yes.
Do you know what I'm talking about?
I know.
I
like
feel
Nick Carter had
yes,
it. Mm-hmm.
That's exactly who I was thinking.
I think, okay, so it means something different today. If you were a woman and you were to go ask your hairdresser for curtain bangs, you'd probably get something different. But I think that's the term that people have come up with. Like the split hair with the little strands in front. Yeah.
So it's funny that like, I don't think it looks particularly good, but it makes me feel warm and fuzzy to see.
Yes, it's nostalgic because Leo DiCaprio had that going on too.
Yes.
There were so many people who had that, and I feel the same way. It's comforting.
Listen, we did not talk enough about Leo in this episode.
No, we did not. That could be another episode.
I had something I wanted to posit to you.
Please.
And I want to say this. I feel like it's going to be perceived as controversial, but I really, in my heart of hearts, don't mean it to be controversial.
I love a hot take.
So just go with me on this.
I'm here for it.
And this first sentence is going to get my point across, but I don't think it properly represents how I feel. One of the things I'm most nostalgic for in 90s fashion is that fashion and clothing were a little more conservative. And I feel like that is going to ping people's red flags, like, because I feel like saying something is conservative can be construed as a bad thing. So I thought a lot about it, and I'm not going to shame kids today. That's not what I'm here to do. And I'm not going to shame sexy culture.
Yeah.
But it felt like 90s kids were allowed to be kids a little longer.
Yes.
And there's always these memes about us when we were 13 versus kids now when they're 13. And kids who are 13 now are very like blonde highlights, very makeup, very tube. I don't even know, like midriffs, and it's like, because social media is so rampant and so in our faces 24/7, I feel like girls have a lot of pressure to always look a certain way. And you and I were talking about the Victoria's Secret documentary that's on Hulu,
yes.
and they mentioned that the it look now is very homogenous. Like all girls who are in LA, they get the lips done, they get the hair done, they all look very similar. So when we were 13, and this was in the 2000s, so not necessarily the 90s, but I feel like we had a lot less pressure, and there were mean boys and there were mean girls, but it just makes me think that we had a little more time to be kids before, I don't want to say the word sexualized, but before young girls, I don't know. Do you have anything to say about that?
I have so much
help
to say
help
about
me put
this.
my thoughts
No,
into place.
You have so many great ideas, and I think these questions are so worth asking. Even if we don't have an answer to them, I think they're things that are worth asking ourselves. And I think especially you, as someone who teaches young people, you see certain shifts happening.
Yeah.
And I think I don't even know if I can make this coherent because I've just had so many thoughts about it. I think that I feel fortunate enough that with the way that I grew up in terms of my mom and my sister, I feel like they were really strong role models to a girl in the sense that I never felt like there was anything inherently shameful about my body. I also felt like it's okay to be a kid for as long as you want. And even watching kids shows, like I was mentioning, even with kind of the grungy fashion, I feel like, I don't know, I think that there seemed to be more of an emphasis on comfort for people.
And practicality.
You know, that's the word, exactly. There was a practicality to it. And I think that it's important to be able to feel like you can be a kid and run around, and I don't know, just I have so many thoughts about this.
And so maybe this brings my point a little more home. In the 90s, in the early 2000s, we weren't worried about likes and shares and this. So I almost wonder if these young people feel this pressure. They want to get the likes. They want to get the followers. It's funny. You can look at people's social media accounts and tell what generation they are. Like millennials have like a cool couple hundred followers. And I went through this phase where the game on Facebook and MySpace was to have as many friends as possible.
Yes.
And then I went through a purge and I was like, okay, I'm only going to keep people that I like really know and really like. But the most common high schooler today has thousands of followers, and they're so connected in a way that we never were. Like, I don't know about you, but for the most part, we only really kept to our school and the drama of our school.
Yeah.
My kids come in and they're like, we have beef with a girl in this other school district. I'm like, really? So I feel like we were kind of exempt. We weren't dressing for the likes. We weren't dressing for the followers, for the shares, and for, so
that's such a great point.
Being a kid is so hard as it is. To add all of that to kids today is something that is...
I love the way that you weaved all of that together, because I do think it's so connected. I remember being in 7th grade, 2005, and I remember the girls who were cool in my grade, I remember them going to Victoria's Secret and going to get thongs, and I was like, what?
In 7th grade.
Yeah, and I was just barely done with playing Barbies.
Right.
I felt, and I mean, I think part of it's just all personal too, but I have to wonder, and I ask myself this as a woman, how much of the way that we dress and do things is really for us, and how much of it is, I know that this is a really broad term and some people would say it doesn't even exist, but the male gaze.
Yeah.
How much of it? And I look at myself, and I was a very late bloomer, but I just wonder how much girls today really, if you want to wear a crop top, whatever, but don't you also just want to enjoy being a teenager, even a teacher? And I know that teenagers are going through changes and want to be appealing to whoever they're interested in and everything, but I completely agree. I think that when we didn't have as many eyes on us.
No.
And
literally.
No.
Like, that's not a figure of speech.
No, literally. And when I went to school, I didn't, and there's nothing wrong with makeup or anything, but I didn't really start wearing makeup until later high school. And I did not look picture perfect every day. I did not have the expectation that somebody might be taking my picture. I was very much awkward, and I think you're supposed to be as a teenager. Right. I think that's healthy, because you are in flux. You're between being a child and being an adult, and you look like you're in between being a child and an adult. And I think that it definitely begs the question of what's normal in becoming an adult, but what are we making choices because we feel pressured, because we think people will like us more if we do this, even though it's not really authentic to us.
Right.
So I wonder that a lot. And yeah, I think I actually in my notes, I mentioned the 1995 movie, The Babysitter's Club. The reason I mentioned it is because I feel like the movie does such a good job of showing different aesthetics for girls at that time. Like Christy was a tomboy. She was wearing overalls and stripes and backwards hats. And then you had Stacy, who was like she would have shopped at Ann Taylor if she was an adult, like Ralph Lauren, very classic kind of feminine tailored stuff. And then you had Dawn, who was very bohemian and stuff. But I feel like they all looked cute, but they all still looked like tween or teen girls.
Hold on.
You know?
I'm getting a thesis here.
Yeah. Bring it
How
home.
Culture was monochromatic, but style was diverse.
Yeah.
And now culture is diverse, but style is monochromatic.
Yes.
I don't know.
That's what I love. And that's why I love looking at what younger people are, because I think younger people are tastemakers in a lot of ways,
Yeah.
right? And they're the ones who get to say, it's funny because before, teenagers weren't even really a thing before the 50s, right?
Exactly.
But nowadays they really do dictate what's in or what's out.
Yeah.
So that's why I always look, and yeah, I wonder how with social media and having access to Google and being able to look at past decades and look at past trends and stuff, how that informs what people wear, I think is really neat. And it's like, how the hell are mullets cool again? You know, it's like, how does all this stuff come together?
I think if you're a younger person listening to this, my advice would just be, whatever your authentic self is, strive to be that.
Totally. So I don't think there's any better advice than that. I remember getting teased for wearing a tie to high school one day, like a skinny. This was the 2000s. I was wearing a skinny tie. I was probably
But that's like punk rock. That's like all, that's like Panic at the Disco.
Thank you. But yeah, exactly. And I remember this one girl made a crack about it, and I didn't really care because I think that what you wear should be fun, and I think that as long as you feel comfortable in it and you don't feel like you have to wear anything else to impress. And I know that sounds really trite. And I know that when my parents would say that to me, I'd be like, oh my God, of course you're saying that. But it's true. Wear what you want and pull from all different places. Pull from the movies you love, the music you listen to. I love dressing like my grandma dressed. My grandma wore a lot of black and white. I think that's so cool and so chic. And I wear that today. It's like, it should really be a reflection of the things and the people you love. So just wear what you want. Thank you for tuning into Kenzie's Fashion Corner, and I would love to meet again in the 2000s.
Foreshadowing.